if there are errors on it, let me know. Here, let's see. I think that will work, maybe.
No judgment.
Can you see the picture of the orchid? Okay. And I'm going to go back to you. And you can also type. I'll try to keep the chat open. And just, you can interrupt me at any time. So so I'm Beth Fallon. My email address is up here, Beth_Fallon, MPS. And I am the plant ecologist here. So my background is in inventory and monitoring with the Park Service. And then I got my PhD in plant biology, where I was looking at how trees respond to climate. So specifically, like, how do they move water and what happens during a drought, or how vulnerable are they to freezing? So I think a lot about species ranges and how that's associated with where they live. And I think a lot about how plants, live and die, and where they do that and why they do that. And I wanted to say today, the science community, especially the academic science community, but science community in general, is being encouraged to have this shutdown STEM, to think about the protests for Black Lives Matter and equality. And so I thought today I would look into, the history of especially Black Americans in Rainier, to get some connection with vegetation. And in my cursory search yesterday, I couldn't find anything that popped out. So I was kind of disappointed to not have this clear connection. And I think maybe part of that is just showing how unclear history is, and exploring who's involved with different places in science here in the park and in Washington and in the wider world, and how people can be erased. So I just wanted to say that, and I'd be happy if anyone had more information about the history of non-white people in the park, and especially associated with natural history and vegetation. I'd love to hear more about that, and hear about the sources you have, and explore those. So the vegetation program here, let's see if I can actually flip through. We have maybe 3 basic parts that I'll focus on today. We have a restoration program, which involves weed management, and it also involves active meadow restoration and plantings in campgrounds primarily. Kim Popek is the revegetation crew lead, so they'll be out working on weeds right now, and later plantings in the fall. And then Josh Drown is the park horticulturist. I always want to say horticulturalist, but horticulturist. And he runs a really amazing greenhouse facility down in Tea Woods, where he grows the plants for the restoration work for campgrounds and for meadows. And then our hazard tree program, which I'll talk about a lot, which is taking a lot of my time as the season opens, is focused on reducing tree fall only in developed areas. So we only have hazard trees where they're likely to fall on people or structures. And we have a new hazard tree coordinator, a forestry tech that's coming in, and he'll be in the park next week, Javier Salazar. So I have their email addresses up here, and I can share these slides with you too. And then another part of the program is monitoring. And what I'm going to talk about today is the white bark pine monitoring we're doing this summer. So a big part of our restoration work here is noxious weed control. And there's a few reasons that we do this. One is, because of the park mandate to conserve the ecosystem as it was found, weeds that come in because there's so much habitat destruction in North America and, worldwide, they can really take hold in a way that they wouldn't be able to if there wasn't so much habitat fragmentation and destruction. So we might think that any plant that comes into a place could become naturalized. That's how plants moved around the world, is something would get distributed by a bird randomly on an island, and it would slowly become naturalized into the system and maybe evolve into a new species. But that's pretty hard for native ecosystems to take currently, because they're so they're so fragmented. So it's very unlikely that you'll just have a plant come in like Scotch broom and then, you know, grow in one spot and slowly become naturalized where it has pests and things, because it can just take over a whole clear-cut forest and become an issue for regeneration of forests. So we control noxious weeds because we want to conserve the native ecosystem here and also the appearance of the ecosystem. So what we know about weeds is weeds don't represent all plant communities equally. So what we have is people are seeing more and more of the same kinds of plants, even if they're not the same kind of species of plants. And we don't get this richness of experience of the diversity of plant communities. So if you go to Boston, from Seattle or to Minneapolis, you'll see like the same kinds of species growing on the roadsides in cities, even though they might not all be there wouldn't all be the same native communities there. So weed control is in some ways just a way of preserving both native ecosystems and like a person's experience of the diversity of plants that would grow in a place, rather than starting to see kind of the same things everywhere. So the weed control that the crews do here is they'll do pulling. So this pink flower plant here is foxglove, and it's quite beautiful, and unfortunately it produces so many seeds per plant. So that's a plant that can be pulled, and you all might be quite familiar with digitalis. That's the one that produces the digitoxin, which is it's used in heart medication. So if you see it, and you're positive you know what it is, you can contact Kim and the weed crew so they know where it is and they can go treat it and pull it. And if you are outside of the park somewhere pulling it, just make sure you wear gloves or wash your hands afterwards, because you really don't want to be exposed to a lot of digitoxin. And then the crew also does herbicide treatments too. So some plants just really don't respond to pulling. You know, of course, plants are quite good about forming root systems, and then they can grow clonally. We have several plants like the St. John's wort can grow clonally off just little root stalks. So then they spray those plants in a very targeted way, just like right on the plants themselves, to hope to control them. And the crew will be out in orange shirts on roadsides, and you'll see them there working. And I'm sure they'd be more than happy to tell you what they're working on and what plants are there. And they do such a good job in the park that when you drive through the park, like when you drive in from Packwood into the park, you might notice that there's often a pretty stark change from like the gate from outside of the parkland to inside, where there's not like the white daisies that you'll see everywhere now. Those are oxide daisies, and they're not a native plant. And when you get into the park, they become fewer and far between as you have more native species on the roadside. So it's a nice way to preserve someone's just drive through the park, is it looks a little bit more like it might have 60 years ago inside the park. And then another part of the revegetation crew's work are these meadow plantings. And so this is from last year from the Paradise Inn Annex, and they planted 70,000 plants there. They still have a little bit more work to do. But so Josh grows all these plants down in the greenhouse, and then they planted them out in species mixes to try to mimic the native plantings, or how the plants would look in sort of little wetland areas and up on the little rises around the annex. And they do that also out in the meadows in disturbed areas as well. More so in Paradise than in Sunrise, but there's little bits of work that they do in Sunrise, and we're hoping to do some more work there in the coming years, probably not this year. Let's see, what else do I have to say about that? Oh, one thing that I'm kind of excited about exploring this year, so this isn't, is thinking about how we can try different restoration techniques that might help us change some things about the meadows that are changing naturally with climate change. So there's this thought that trees are invading meadows associated with climate change. So the warmer it gets, trees can move higher up into areas where they maybe wouldn't have thrived. So subalpine or like lower alpine meadows. But what we also know is that there used to be different ways, traditional ways of managing meadows. So especially perhaps Paradise meadows would have been burned more frequently. And we know that trees don't grow as much where there is like frequent burning. So one thing I'd like to explore is whether we might think about controlling, like restoring some of our meadow systems with other traditional methods of managing land systems. So that's something that I hope I'm going to have a chance to read a little bit more about this this year, and then explore with the park archaeologist about what information we already have about how meadows used to be managed. Because of course, the national parks were created from land that was managed, and there's a lot of evidence all over the world that systems that were thought to be just natural, were actually like heavily managed by the people who live there. And when you take away that management, things change. And so we coincidentally are experiencing climate change at a time at which we've now been, 150 years or more without traditional methods of management. And that might be exacerbating some of the things that are happening in our meadow systems here or forest systems here. So just to jump over quickly to hazard trees. So hazard trees are something we manage in the park too, and that's in our program we identify them, and then the roads and trails crews primarily do the felling of trees if they need to be removed. But so the way we think about hazard trees is they have to be able to fall and hit a person or a building. Otherwise, they're not a hazard tree. So it's the sort of, if the tree falls in the woods, it's not a hazard tree if it wasn't going to fall on a tent site or on a trail or something else. Then that's just how trees go. But of course, trees die for all sorts of reasons, and we have such long-lived forests here that tree diseases are actually one of the ways for there to retain biodiversity. So you can imagine, especially over at Ohana, there's 3 really common tree species, and they grow so big and they'll grow so long and they'll shade out almost everything in the understory, and you'll just have this huge forest. And so tree diseases, bark beetles, fungi that destroy the root system and cause the tree to topple are actually a way of opening up forest clearings and creating stand diversity and allowing little herbs to flourish. So we actually have a lot of native tree diseases and bark and wood boring beetles that damage trees but are good for the forest overall. It's just it's a huge pain when they happen right next to a campsite. So we go out and assess trees, and that's what Javier will be focusing on when he gets here. And then we recommend trees for removal, or if we can, we recommend them to be chopped out a little bit if they're not going to fall on a campsite, so that they can still be there for habitat. And so you probably will see someone out looking at trees a lot and tapping on trees a lot. And there's some pretty cool things you can find in all of our trees. You can see these bark beetles in the bark. This white stuff on the bottom, this picture is kind of disorienting, but it's a fungus that invaded a tree root, and that tree fell down between last fall and this spring because the roots just completely rotted out of the tree. Okay, so the last part I want to talk about is whitebark pine. So whitebark pine is a keystone species in the kind of subalpine to alpine, the tree line area in Mount Rainier and in the Cascades. There are these gorgeous kind of stunty little 5-needled pines, and their seeds are primarily dispersed by Clark's nutcrackers. So they cache a ton of seeds, and then some of them manage to grow up. So I think they have like a 10-kilometer radius. So there's a really nice association between these trees and the nutcrackers. And in Mount Rainier, these trees are primarily in the Sunrise area, the northeast corner of the park. And of course, these gorgeous subalpine to tree line areas. And last year I was out on a site and we just got to see all these mountain goats below us, wallowing in the meadow, and then they passed out for a day. It's just a gorgeous place to be in these trees. And this is an area where there's kind of crumholts, right? So you have the little tree clumps that are growing that are caused by the really harsh conditions at these near tree line areas. But our whitebark, unfortunately, is affected by a white pine blister rust. So this is an introduced fungus sometime in the 1940s, 1930s. It was maybe introduced. It's native to Asia. It's like East Asia. And it has an alternate host relationships, but its alternate hosts are, it grows on, I think, currants, and there's a lot of species, a lot of native species here that it uses as a host. So it'll grow on the whitebark and other 5-needle pines, and it grows on other species in the park. And it, unfortunately, over time can kind of girdle and kill whitebark trees. So what we go from is these kind of nice alpine clumps to really spare trees on ridge lines. But we still have whitebark here in the park. And from some genetic studies, it turns out that Mount Rainier, maybe more so than North Cascades or the Olympics, they have more resistance to the disease. That doesn't mean they don't get it, but they just don't die quite as much, which is not maybe the most hopeful outcome, but it's better than nothing. So that means that we might be able to use these, like the more resistant genotypes in the park, to restore areas. And this is a species that is a candidate for listing as an endangered species. So that's something that's ongoing. And this summer, we're continuing to set up monitoring plots where we'll go out and we find sites that have 10 or more whitebark, which is a little bit difficult in Mount Rainier because there's been a lot of mortality over time, and also because the trees seem to grow kind of sparsely. You know, there's like 1, 2, 3 trees on a ridge line, and then there's nothing else there, and it's this perfect spot, but there aren't 10 trees. So it is kind of a difficult process. So it's a lot of going out to these gorgeous sites and saying, oh, there's just not enough whitebark here, and then finding another spot. But once we install the plots, they're long-term monitoring plots where we look at recruitment, what other species are on the site, and also whether there's infection, whether there's whitebark pine blister rust present, and how that's impacting the trees. And that's going to be a really nice way for us to look at the impact over time, and hopefully some regeneration as well. And then another thing I'm really excited about, besides that plot work, which we'll be doing in July and August and September, is starting to think about overall, where do these trees grow in the North Cascades? And one thing that the Park Service and the Forest Service are broadly trying to do is get land managers together to develop core areas, so that if the tree is listed, we have a way to hit the ground running with how we're going to manage that. Are we going to restore areas? Are we just going to like have whitebark areas that we conserve? And so something we're trying to do is start to look at, well, we have a lot of information about these trees. What can we say about where they grow in the North Cascades and in each park, and how they'll be impacted by, say, climate change and disease, and how we can use that to determine management if they become a listed species. So we have a lot of sites that we know where the trees occur, so we can start to do things like, here is a plot on the right that shows what we expect about temperature changes in the park and those sites. And so we expect by 2040 about a 2 °C mean annual temperature increase in NOCA, and a little bit less than Olympic, and Mount Rainier is kind of right in the middle at like 1.9 degrees. And what would that mean for a whitebark, which are already kind of growing in this tree line environment where the temperature, the minimum and the maximum temperatures really do matter. So that's something that I'm excited to work on, hopefully this summer or fall as well, once we have more data from our final monitoring plots here. Okay, that's my full presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. I should have also said at the beginning that I've only been here for a year, so I'm happy to take any questions you have, and if I have no idea what the answer is, I will find out and get back to you.
Thanks, Beth. That was awesome. So I have a question about the traditional ecological knowledge and climate change. How do you kind of parse out, you know what I mean? Like, is that possible? Like parsing out like what is climate, you know?
Yeah, no, I think it's hard. So this will be like my hand wavy kind of guess, which is, so there was, to maintain snow play, I think it was 3 years ago, or maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, they cut down a bunch of the small trees that were in the snow play area. So there's a small, mostly subalpine firs. And what we know from those trees, so, and then volunteer groups counted the tree rings. So I think, and I was trying to find that data to put up there, but I feel like the trees were about 50 to 75 years old. And while there was climate change happening, 75 years ago, what was also happening was like the culmination of like a difference in use, like fire suppression, different ways that the meadows were being managed, after 50 years as a national park. So I feel like it's interesting, but climate change to me seems to be a part of it, but that wouldn't, I don't know why there would suddenly there would be trees growing in those meadows just 75 years ago, just based on climate change, which wasn't a massive factor then, So that's like one thing that got me thinking about that is, and also there's some information that there used to be more frequent fires in high meadow areas in in Rainier, in the Cascades, from ash layering in lakes. And so I think we could use that to figure out if that was something that was happening and if we wanted to reinstitute it.
Cool, that's really exciting. That's a fun project.
Can you guys hear us now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Bryce has a question.
So a few of us were wondering about fire management in the park. Are there controlled burns? Is there or is the sort of fire cycle too slow to really worry about that?
So that would, I feel like your fire questions would be better for Jeff Walker, right, Annie? But the fire return rate is so slow in the park that I think I don't know if there have been controlled burns. That's a really good question. I think there's been, my understanding was that a lot of burns that were, outside of developed areas, any fires were have been left for a while because they're so infrequent. But that is a good question. And it's something to think about more, because I think that we're going to be more prone to fire risk as we have, the climate stress, which will cause higher tree deaths, and dead trees are going to be more vulnerable to fire. And also climate stress can exacerbate, a beetle outbreak that might only actually kill a couple trees and just cause, a fair amount of trees to be occupied but not killed by beetles, could suddenly kill trees if there's an unexpected drought, and then we might have more fire risk. So it would be a good question too for the future about how we'll treat things in the future.
Beth, I know in the inland Northwest, we think a lot about bark beetles with climate impacts. Are bark beetles something that you guys are thinking about here, and have they had an impact on our forests in the park?
Yeah, and I think, so I was just thinking about in context of Cougar Rock Campground, seemed to have got hit by a fur engraver outbreak, and fur engravers are a native beetle that just, get under the bark and disrupt sap flow. And they seem to have killed several hundred silver firs at Cougar Rock. And that's already a pretty dense little spot anyway, so in some ways they might have been doing us a favor. But so I think there are on and off beetle outbreaks, and that might have been exacerbated by the drought for the last couple of years. But it is certainly something we have to redo our hazard tree management plan. We had a plan in place for how we're going to deal with hazard trees in developed areas and how we're going to think about threats, and we have to redo that this year And I think thinking more about those outbreaks and how we might manage for them would be important. So I think, yeah, I think the bark beetles are an ongoing issue and might become, they might result in higher mortality in the future.
So we were on Glacier Basin the other day and we're noticing spruce galls. Do you know anything about those, like the ones that look kind of like little cones? They look like large cones, sort of.
No, I don't think I do.
Yeah, you have to look for them. They were like everywhere in this one spot we were in. Yeah.
On Glacier Basin?
It was over on the Emmons Moraine Trail.
Oh, cool. I'll have to look up spruce galls. I'm putting it on my list here.
Yeah, they look like little, I don't know, like little cones or little like pineapples.
Oh, you know what? And I think we have one at our, like some affecting our a tree at our house. So I had recently looked them up. And yeah, if you break them apart, there are like little eggs or insects in there. It's pretty cool. Next time you go up to did you grab one and break it open?
Well, we did, but it was like an old one, so it didn't have anything good in there. But we should have broken a new one. That was a good idea. Yeah. I love galls.
Yeah, I'd be curious what you see. Yeah, I haven't gotten really into conifer galls. I had done all this work on oaks before, and oaks have like an impressive series of galls, but they're mostly from wasps, and so I have to get more into conifer galls.
What are some of the main, other than like the white fungus that you showed, what are some of the main issues that you're seeing at the Ohana campground and what's creating a lot of the hazard trees there?
Yeah, so the Ohana campground, they of course would have like big old Doug firs will have bark beetle issues. And one of I think one of the bigger issues there are things like root and butt rot of trees. Just long-lived trees over time are just going to be, they're going to get attacked by more things. So it's really just it's just a statistics thing, I think, at that point. But so they have, there's something called Schweinitziae butt rot. And so there are these like cow pie, like fungi, and you can see them they're usually away from the trees, but they cause a rot in the lower portion of the tree stem. And then I think Ohana Bakash, and I have to go out there again and review it, they also have laminated root rot, which is a disease that spreads from tree to tree. So there are a lot of these root diseases where once you find it in one tree, it's like a site disease. And so it's just present there and it'll kill any trees that are susceptible. So it is one of those diseases that maintains biodiversity in the forest, in these long-lived forests, by creating open pockets where you no longer can have hemlock or Doug fir. So you get cedars growing in there, you get a kind of more diversity than you would have had. But unfortunately, it also means that you can have these big trees that start to fail, even though they look, massive and healthy, because their roots are just rotting from the base.
Awesome. Any questions from the Sunrise Ohana crew?
We're curious about other invasives that you guys are controlling for around the park. And of course, we're particularly interested in the east side of the park.
Yeah, we should have Kim sit in because she is the invasive expert. So I think the big things that the crew are controlling on the east side are, there's that oxeye daisy, just because it seems to spread so readily and it's really noticeable. Right now they're focusing on Herb Robert. Have you seen that? It's a little pink flowered geranium. It's kind of smelly, like a herbal smelly when you pull it. And that one unfortunately invades forested areas. So a lot of the weeds do best, in disturbed roadsides. And when you get into the forest, they can't establish that well because there's just not as much sunlight. They're not used to that. But herb Robert seems to be an exception in being able to really get into like forest understories. She said now they're also working on coltsfoot. Oh, thanks. European coltsfoot, which is something that is a more recent, I think, introduction to the park. And I'm trying to think what else. They're on the lookout for, what is it? Bromus inermis, I want to say, which is a grass that can, that's been up at Paradise, maybe because it was planted there in the 60s, but is unfortunate invasive. And what else would they be controlling on the east side? They look out for St. John's wort. That seems to be pretty common in the Stevens Canyon Road area. And I think one thing is that for a while the park, the revegetation crew was all stationed in Longmire, and they are this year too because we have a smaller crew than we expected. But they have for the last couple of years prior to this year had split up so that they had a crew stationed at Ohana and a crew stationed in Longmire. So they were able to do a lot more treatments on the east side more frequently than they had been doing. So this year will be a bit of a scramble like it is for everyone. But oh yeah, that coltsfoot that Annie put up is actually our native coltsfoot, and it should be seeding now. So if you see any big like daisy but really broad globose like seed heads, it seems to be really common in the squally, so you guys might not, but it might be over in the lower lands of Ohana. Yeah, it's the yellow one that's invasive. And I think there's a couple other species of coltsfoot. It's pretty, I haven't quite got my head around coltsfoot, but sorry, I got distracted. Oh, so they've been doing a lot more treatments on the east side. So I think that there's like a catch up to treat weeds there. Yes, that's the one. And let's see. Oh, but I do know we are going to be doing some work on the Mather Slump and then the Frying Pan Bridge area where they're going to be doing construction work in the future, the next couple of years. They'll probably be doing treatments there. So if you see anybody out there, you can ask them what they're treating.
Thank you. And thanks for the pictures, Annie.
Oh, no problem. So Beth, have you dug into, like a couple years ago in the Ohana Prakash campground, Arnie had interns like mapping every single tree. Could you talk a little bit about that project if you know anything about that one?
I know just a little bit about it. That's like, I feel like in some ways that's kind of the future, like just being out and doing assessments. You're out there and it's just trying to remember like which tree you're looking at. So that project, I think they were using a total station. So they had like a station out and then like I think lasers to get like specific distances to trees. And so they were trying to develop this perfect map. And I think like all things, it was a little bit difficult to get like exactly what they wanted. There's some error, but we have LiDAR of the park. So we have those kind of like 3D images and height estimates where you can kind of guess like X is a tree because it's, this tall and it's not, there's these. So I think there's some correlation between those two. I have to get out and try it again. So I think we had that. I think it's a really cool concept and we just haven't actually like ground checked it to see what we can do with it. But when I've been out doing hazard tree assessments, I've been kind of whining to myself that I just want little handheld LiDAR so I could like map all the trees around me and then mark which ones I had checked and which ones I hadn't. So I hope it's the way of the future, though maybe not the total station where you have to spend months mapping each tree. That doesn't sound as fun.
Yeah, it looked intense, but yeah, that was exactly what they were doing. They had a total station. They were using lasers to like map out. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want that, like, actually, so it's like the new iPads even have LiDAR capabilities to like 3 meters. It's really close, but like you can now get like a 3-dimensional map. I don't actually know how that works. It must be based on a photo. I don't think they're shooting lasers. I don't know. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but so I'm hoping that like it's sort of in the next 10 years future that we can kind of have a handheld way to do that that's like fairly accurate without without months and months of work.
Nice. Any more questions from staff? Bryce, you got anything you're dying to know? Good.
Not particularly, but I did want to say that I noticed and really appreciate the complete lack of Scotch broom that I've seen in the park. Considering how much there is in the Packwood area, it's really awesome.
Yeah, that's the Scotch broom right now especially is just like, yeah, you just really see it everywhere. But I think the park has had a really massive effort, especially in like the Nisqually corridor, and I assume in the Cowlitz area to just really pull all that Scotch broom. It was just pulling, I think, because yeah, you don't have to drive that far out of the Nisqually entrance either to just see Scotch broom, and it's unfortunate that it's such a pretty plant. So, but yeah.
How does it spread?
I think it's primarily just spread by seed, and it's so prolific in its flowering, because its roots aren't very substantial. And I haven't quite figured out, because I was pulling some in my own property, and they have so bean plants have nodules because they have an association with bacteria, and the bacteria, the bean plants form these little homes for the bacteria, so the bacteria can fix nitrogen in a oxygen-free environment. And there were nodules on the plants, but there weren't even that many. So I don't know if the plants aren't short on nitrogen here, or if it's just a really perfect environment. But I don't think they spread by root. I think they're all spreading by seeds and then just growing up in these really open environments in the rivers and in like recently harvested forest areas.
I have a question.
Oh, you have one?
You go
Go
first.
for it.
Okay, my question is just, I know that I had asked you about this prior for the white bark pine surveys, but I don't know if you've formulated more plans for that surveying starting in July, but how might like some of the Sunrise crew get involved in something like that?
Yeah, we have not formulated a plan. That's our part of the goal for the next couple of weeks. We have a very experienced biotech coming to lead that, and he'll be on in July, but we're going to start making plans for what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So I guess some of our planning even depends on like whether I'm assuming we'll be able to do at least administrative camping, and because a lot of the work is either requires camping out at White River or backcountry camping, which of course we can do. So that work this year is primarily going to be going out to random sites that have been put on a map and checking whether there's white bark there, and then maybe later installing the plots. But we seem to have to survey between 10 and 20 sites to find one place we could actually install a plot. And it's nice to have buddies out for that. So I guess what I could do, I could send you an email, or I could send Annie an email and let you know what's the best way to reach you guys at Sunrise.
I can put all the emails in here and you can just send everybody. I won't be here, Beth, for the summer.
Oh, that's right. You're on, yeah.
But I'll make a list of emails in the chat right now, and then you can just copy it.
Okay. That sounds great.
I have a question about interpreting the story of white bark pine to visitors.
Mm-hmm.
I have this sense that white bark pine has like a special place in the hearts and minds of people in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
But I don't really know why. Can you kind of explain what's cool about them so we can tell that story well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I might have to give it a little bit more thought to give you a good story, but I think it is this very long-lived species that grows, it's a tree-lined species, so that's it's growing up where the trees sort of peter out. So you can find it where there are fewer trees, and it has this really nice relationship with the nutcrackers. So I think that's a really interesting that they're really relying on that bird to distribute their seeds, and the bird is really relying on the whitebark pine. So sometimes it's called a keystone species. I don't know if that's appropriate, but it certainly is kind of an indicator of maybe the health of our like subalpine alpine areas, and maybe that's what's so nice about it. It's this tree that stands out because it's not necessarily near other trees in these like beautiful like really topographically diverse environments. And I think because it has been affected for quite a long time now. I mean, the white pine blister rust has been around for 80 years. So there's been a lot of death too. So maybe this, those skeletons of whitebark are a really common sight. So it's a really obvious sign of the deterioration of that species and the view shed on these ridge lines. But yeah, I'm gonna have to think about it a little bit more and send you something.
Thanks, Beth. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
I like the idea that it's kind of a story of loss over time that people have been able to see across decades in this really special environment.
Yeah, and we also don't really have pines. We don't have a lot of pines in the park. I know in other places they have pines, and so it's different, but we just don't really have them. So that kind of like fluffy tree is just unusual for you just see it and you're like, oh, that's a whitebark pine. So
Thank you.
So
Hey,
oh, sorry, go for it.
This is Kurt over on the west side. In previous trainings and studies, I learned that one of the reasons that mountain hemlocks and subalpine firs are so successful, particularly like Paradise, is because they could, bud or send new trees up from their roots that are spread out. Mm-hmm. And that may not be the case so much anymore with climate change and a longer growing season, more warm days for the cones and seeds to actually work. But the previous plant ecologist said that he didn't think that was actually had been happening at Paradise, that mountain hemlocks and subalpine firs were actually reproducing by budding or, sending trees up from their roots. Do you have a stance on that?
Do you mean like in terms of like the kind of meadow invasion aspect of trees there? Just
that how they actually how we get new trees up there.
Oh yeah. I guess so I know like if you think of like the Krumholtz trees, that is like they're often just like one individual that is like budding up from the roots, but then you also have the aspect of when you get a little kind of tree copse, like a little set of trees, you also can create that can be a nice habitat for other trees to grow up. So theoretically, it could be like one individual plus a lot of seedlings of different individuals growing there. I guess my impression from seeing like trees grow out into meadow environments where there are fewer trees is that those are just seeds that are distributed there that have been able to grow. But yeah, I guess once you get into, if you have one tree and then a bunch of little trees around it, I don't know if that's because it's created a little microclimate where tree seedlings can more readily come up, or if they're budding off. I'll have to look into that.
And what we learned before was that, some species can reproduce, get new trees by budding or sending up trees from their roots that are spread out. Some can't. And that the reason that the mountain hemlocks and the subalpine firs are so prolific at Paradise, for example, is because they can do that. But
Yeah.
that was previous plant ecologists, many years ago. And the last plant ecologist before you started to say, I don't know if that's true. Do you know if they can do that? Can mountain hemlocks and subalpine firs reproduce through budding?
I think so. Yeah, I guess so. I've started to look into that recently, and my initial thought was like, oh, conifers don't do that much, but they certainly do in those little like Krumholtz type situations. So,
Okay.
but I don't think they would do it. I don't think they would do it at a distance. So, if you're talking a tree that's 10 feet away from another tree, then that I would assume is its own individual tree. And then as comparison to other trees that might be in the area, yeah, I'm not sure. I know that, when we're out doing white bark monitoring, we're supposed to be counting individual trees, and there's like some debate about, what makes an is this branch coming, even though it's underground, is it actually like kind of a runner from that tree, or is it its own tree and it becomes a whole, what is an individual anyways kind of question. But yeah, I'll have to look and see which of our trees are most successful at that, because that's an interesting question. Because of course, if you can bud off an adult tree, that's a lot easier to do than to grow from a seedling and survive the harsh environment as a seedling, and then keep growing into a tree. So
the story back then was that there weren't enough days that were warm enough for seeds to be successful. But with climate change now, that's no longer the case.
Yeah.
The reasoning behind an increase
Mm-hmm.
in trees filling in up there.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm going to look it up. I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
So it seems like with 80 years, and like you probably would be biased this way because you're a plant ecologist, but it seems like with 80 years of white bark blister rust, like now we're just going to list it as an endangered. That seems like a lot, like it seems like maybe too late. Like, is it?
Yeah. Oh, no.
Like compared to animals, it seems like animals, they're maybe faster moving on problems.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I would say I definitely don't know enough about the process of endangered species listing, but I always as a biased plant person, I always feel like there's a hesitancy to list plants because plants grow in a certain spot. So if you list them, that means something for a location, whereas for animals, it means something for a habitat, which is a little bit more mobile. But that is just totally my bias and thinking about why sometimes I feel like there's a hesitancy to list plants. But I don't know. Maybe it is just the effect of realizing how widespread the disease is and how widespread the mortality is that is finally moving things. And I have no idea whether and how quickly they may or may not be listed. So it's still just they're a candidate for, they clearly are experiencing issues. Whether that means that they're going to get more protections it's not clear to me.
But you're just doing the groundwork in case they are, so then you can be ready. Is kind
Yeah,
of the idea?
Yeah, what we want to do, and other networks have already done this, and the Forest Service has done this for a lot of their sites, is we just want to be able to say, this is kind of where white bark grow. And the goal of these core areas is to, at minimum, say, this is where they grow in the park. And then also maybe to highlight areas where, like in Mount Rainier, we might say, this is where they grow and where they did grow. And also this is an area where we know they're more resistant to, genetically, the trees there are more resistant to white pine blister rust than other trees in North Cascades or even in the park here.
Great. Any other questions? Sunrise, Ohana, West District? Beth, do you have any favorite resources that you've been using to learn about Mount Rainier for folks?
Oh,
Plants here?
No, I feel like I still have so much more to do. Oh, I do have I think I've already told you about this. I do like the app Washington Wildflower Search is a really nice app that's for iOS and Android, and it's fairly complete, and it also has trees and shrubs on there, and you can do a search by I don't actually know who makes it, but you can do a search by like flower color, the way leaves are arranged, whether they're opposite or alternate on the stem, and the time of year, and approximately where you are, and to narrow down species. And that's really useful. What else have I been looking up? No, I still use for plants. I also use the beak, the flora of Mount Rainier. I find that really useful. I don't know if you guys have that available to you, but that's a really nice, pretty inclusive way to look up plants in the park too. And then otherwise it's a lot of Google searching.
Hey, Beth, can you mention the name of that app again? I have an app, but I'm not sure that's the one I have.
It's what? Let me double check it. Okay, Washington Wildflower Search, and the icon is like a little. Maybe it's supposed to be a rhododendron. It's like a pink flower. It's like a image of a pink flower on a green leaf. Is that the one you have?
I'm looking now. Pink flower on a green leaf. Yeah, I have that one.
Yeah. Do you find it useful?
Well, actually, I'm not sure it's the one, but it's not downloaded at the moment, so I can't really easily look it up. But if it's the one I'm thinking it is, I found it really useful over at Sunrise last year. So
yeah, I think it should. And I think there should be a good bloom this year, so hopefully there'll be flowers, readily available to identify things. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm gonna try to. I haven't really used it before, but I'm gonna really try to get more into iNaturalist this year to start like submitting photos and looking at photos people have taken in the park. Because I have found iNaturalist useful for a couple things. Like someone submitted a beetle that they were worried was an invasive beetle, and I was able to use other resources, but also iNaturalist to say, oh no, this is just like a native bark, like a tree boring beetle. That happens to look like some other more concerning species. So I'm going to try to like participate more in iNaturalist this year. And I would say if you all see anything that you think is a weed, like an introduced species where you work, please go ahead and take a photo of it and send it to Kim or I, and with a little description of where you found it, and we will come check it out, because we're still trying to expand our map of species, and of course things get introduced to new places all the time, so it's nice to be able to like take care of any problem species right away.
Another
Cool.
question from Kurt. That I think you might know the answer to. When there are trees either we cut or that fall that can't stay where they're at for one reason or another, safety, or what is the policy for us using those trees?
Yeah, Kurt, I could send you the so there's a few ways, and I'll have to again review. I was reviewing the hazard tree management plan, but I think they can be used on site for firewood in specific ways. They also can be used so the preference is, of course, to just recycle them back into the site. That doesn't always make sense if there's like 20 trees that have to come down in a small area and you don't want to just make a log cabin there. So if the debris can't just be left on site, chopped up and left to form nurse logs and just debris, then it can be used for construction projects, if some of the wood is still solid, it could be used, it can be harvested by the tribes, especially cedars might fall into that category, but it's potentially there are other species that they might be interested in. Can be used for firewood, I believe. And then otherwise, I think it's supposed to be hauled off to some place. I think now Couts is where it's going, but I don't know about on the east side where that goes. Maybe you have a better idea of where you've seen things end up.
We have a boneyard, so it's probably probably there.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, it's almost 11. Are there any final questions from anybody? Cool. Beth, thank you so much. Last question. What's your favorite plant at Mount Rainier?
Oh, my favorite plant? I put up the picture of I like the tway blade orchids. I don't know if you've seen them. They're so small, like the Calypso orchids, you know those? They're so charismatic. Even, you know, they're this tall, but they have these big pink like orchid flowers, you know, you're like, but then the tway blade orchids have these little leaves that are, you know, like opposite leaves, and they just have these 2 little leaves and then a little stalk of tiny, tiny little orchid flowers that the macro on my phone is never good enough to take a picture of, but we have 3 species of them, and they're very cute, and they reward you for getting in pretty close. And right now we have really cool slime molds out that I'm still trying to learn more about. So if you see something really brightly colored and just like out of this world, that's probably a cool slime mold. So send me a picture.
Oh, nice. We did see one on the Silver Falls Trail the other day.
Oh,
we didn't know what it was.
I love poking them. It's just like, they're such a strange organism. So yeah. Nice.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. We really, really appreciate your time. And I gave everyone in in the chat, there's some notes and some resources from Beth, and then email addresses. And Beth, I put the email addresses of Sunrise in the chat too.
Oh, perfect.
I got it. Fine. Give me a second, please.
Okay. Great.
Thank you, Beth.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. Hello, Hana Prakash. And there's Kayla. Hi, Kayla.
Hi. See you later.
Bye-bye.